Welcome to the NORR 2024 series that this year will address the state of the future of architecture and engineering. I'm Silvio Baldessera, Chair Emeritus of NORR, founder of NORR, and your host. NORR is a continuing education program founded 17 years ago with three main goals: to teach, learn, improve, and to do that continuously. The program relies on bringing the best guest speakers in three series: architecture, engineering, and masters. Each of the NORR virtual sessions since 2020 has been recorded and are available on NORR YouTube for global access. Welcome to the 13 NORR office staff and invited guests. Welcome to the students from the 16 schools of architecture from Canada, the US, the UK, and Europe. Carol Ross Barney is a recipient of the 2023 AIA Gold Medal. An architect known for expertise in civic space design, she has been dedicated in the creation of public space. Her work has also included community facilities, academic, research buildings, and innovative transit stations. As an architect, urbanist, mentor, and educator, she has been an advocate that excellent design is a right, not a privilege. Amongst her notable projects are 150 miles of Chicago riverfront, including Chicago Riverwalk, the Oklahoma Federal Building, the CTA and Morgan Street stations, McDonald's Chicago and Disney World flagship restaurants, the Searle Visitors Center at Lincoln Park Zoo, the UDM Civil Engineering Building, the multimodal terminal at O'Hare International Airport, and the NASA Communications Facility. Carol's work has received over 200 design awards, including the Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design, the Museum National Award. She has received 14 AIA Honor Awards for architecture, as well as 45 AIA Chicago Awards. Her commitment to sustainability design has been recognized by 2 AIA Committee on Environmental Top 10 Project Awards. Carol is a graduate of the University of Illinois and has served as a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in Costa Rica, contributing to national park planning. She has been teaching at the Illinois Institute of Technology in Advanced Design Studio for over 30 years, sharing her expertise and shaping the next generation. Today, we welcome Carol to talk about the future of cities. Carol, welcome to NORR.
Thank you, Silvio. This is my city. This is Chicago, the Windy City, the city of big shoulders, the birthplace of modern architecture. It has a lot of names. And interestingly, in 1900, as the world passed into the 20th century, a lot of people called this the city of the century. This is 1950. This is the year I was born in Chicago. Interesting, this picture was taken by Stanley Kubrick, who started his career before he became one of the greatest film directors of all times. He started his career at Look magazine. And when he was in his 20s, he was assigned to Chicago, where they told him to capture the glamour and the grit. And so the whole series is called Chicago, City of Extremes. And Chicago was extreme in 1950. The population was 3.6 million people. Just as sort of a marker, 29% of all people lived in cities globally at that point. 50 years earlier, in 1900, the population of Chicago was 1.7 million, and 14% of people lived in cities. In fact, in 1900, Chicago was the 5th largest city in the world. Only London, New York City, Paris, and Berlin were bigger, and even more remarkably, less than 60 years earlier, Chicago had only 5,000 people. And that was the reason that people called it the city of the century. It was not just the fastest growing city of its time, but it also was the fastest growing city that the world had ever seen. And I like to introduce Chicago this way because I think in a lot of ways, Chicago is a case study for the cities we have today, sort of as a byproduct of or as a product of this really explosive growth. Chicago commissioned a city plan. This is one of the renderings from the plan. It's called the Plan of 1909 by Daniel Burnham. They commissioned an architect. I think that was a good idea. And the stated reason of the plan is to beautify Chicago and improve efficiency of commerce. But if you read the plan, it was these beautiful illustrations by Jules Guerin, makes the city look otherworldly. But beyond that, Burnham talked about improving the city in some really basic ways. He talked about the economy of the city, the green space of the city, and the future development of centers. And while Chicago, by the way, Chicago, that was the first comprehensive city plan published by an American city. But he wasn't alone. That was 1909 in Chicago. But thinkers continued to work on cities, and their ideas could be pretty far apart. On this slide, I'm showing you on the left, that is Ville Reduce by Le Corbusier, and Corb felt that cities would be best if they were zoned for the activity. Then you could isolate sound, you could increase light. It looks kind of rigid in his drawing, but he had this very, very controlled attitude towards cities. And by the way, he did that in 1935. It was never constructed. It was supposed to be a suburb of Paris. But in that same year, and this is what I find incredibly, because these are both 1935, Frank Lloyd Wright published a plan for the city of the future. And that's shown on the right side. This is Broadacre City. And Frank took exactly the opposite approach. He decided that cities of the future would be spread out, that the federal government, his proposal was that each family would be given 1 acre of federal land, and then we would communicate and work together with technology, motor cars, radio, telephone, telegraph, and basically standardized machine production. That's how we would work together. Neither one of them were right, but cities continue to be the future of our society and how we live together. Right at about 2000, 50% of the world's population lived in cities. Today, actually, 56%, 4.4 billion people live in cities. And this trend is expected to continue. By 2050, the prediction is that 7 out of 10, 70% of people will live in cities. And this is important because not only are cities dense and remarkable, but they're the center of our lives. Cities produce about 80% of the world's gross domestic product. They are energy centers, they're knowledge centers, they're diverse, they're dense. I think one way to think about the change that cities are going through, if you look at the 19th century, I was really lucky to spend last week in Australia, and I was impressed that at one point they said that when I was there, I remember that they said at one point that the sun rose and set on the Victorian Empire. If you look at the 19th century, it was a century of empires. You may argue as we entered the 1900s, the 20th century, that was the century of countries. I firmly believe that cities are our future, and the 21st century, our century, will be the century of the city. And while cities are highly productive, they're also the biggest contributors to the existential challenge of our time, the potentially mortal damage to our planet. So cities need to be fixed. They need to be rebuilt, and I believe they need to be rebuilt for radical sustainability. And the reason I'm talking to you today as an architect is I think that responsibility to remake our cities as radically sustainable can be done by us. It is incremental. It depends on every building to be built as sustainably. as possible if we're going to meet this challenge. And I like to think about radical sustainability in a couple different ways. One of the things, if you're going to do a sustainable city, it needs to be safe. And I don't know, I know I didn't always think about the idea that my architecture needed to be safe. But more and more we're faced with challenges that may not have been traditional design challenges. The picture I showed you to start out was actually one of a series of pictures. This is another one. This is the cover of National Geographic magazine in July of 2013. So if you flew into Chicago, you'd see this beautiful golden carpet stretching out below you. But actually, the reason we were on the cover of National Geographic was Chicago was a poster child for urban light pollution. The article talked about the fact that scientists believe that light pollution would cause an early spring. And that year, the World Health Organization identified light pollution as a possible carcinogen. And I think that we are increasingly faced with mitigating the environment for safety. This is the Dan Ryan in Chicago with the CTA blue line going down the middle. Really forward thinking when you realize that planners had the foresight to leave the right of way for mass transit, but also really deadly when you think that they didn't consider noise pollution. When you stand on a platform, a CTA platform in the middle of this expressway, the decibel level can reach almost 90 decibels. So meaning that if you were working on a CTA platform, if your desk was there, that wouldn't be permitted by OSHA. And I think that future designs will have to consider this. This is just one little example of a challenge that we had about CTA stations, because a lot of our work is about infrastructure. We were challenged to rethink the stations in the middle of the right-of-way between those 8 lanes of traffic. Obviously, if you do a station there, one of your first problem is daylighting the platform and giving it weather protection. But I think that the future of design and the future of good design is being able to integrate these other criteria that are becoming more and more critical. So as we stood on the platform and measured the decibels, we thought, wow, could we acoustically improve this station? And then we also had the idea that maybe it'd be self-cleaning. So we introduced to CTA the idea of precasting the station canopy, basically taking those 3 drivers of form and combining them into one material. We also decided that we would experiment with a self-cleaning material, concrete. This wasn't constructed, but I like to use it as an example of how criteria can come from a lot of places, and good design comes out of the integrated solution. By the way, the CTA didn't build these. Sometimes innovation has to happen. You have to bring it up multiple times. It was really funny. We were talking to the chief engineer, and he said, this is a really great idea, but concrete is a new material. You go, but Jim, the Romans used concrete. But I understand what he means. We have to be able to accept some risk. The CTA usually does steel canopies. We have to be able to accept some risk to design future cities and future architecture. Another recent example that we were really struck by the idea that buildings need to be safe is this little project we did for the Lincoln Park Zoo. The zoo decided they would build a visitor center. It's a very, very simple program. The zoo is a free zoo, so they don't collect money when you come in. This building, the brief is toilet rooms, a members lounge, first aid, really basic things. And while we talk to them, they do greet people at this entrance, even though you don't have to pay. You're greeted by volunteers who tell you where things are in the zoo, but they also try to get you to join the zoo. And the remark during programming was, wouldn't it be nice if they were just out greeting people? Well, we thought, well, is it possible to do that? And we proposed to accomplish it, you can see on this slide, the completed building, by making a building that actually transformed into a pavilion. So in weather and then we do have weather in Chicago like this, where that's cold or rainy. You could have an enclosed building that's on your left, and then the building can transform into a totally open pavilion. Unfortunately, like a lot of times, the client we worked with during design was not the client who we worked with during when the building was operated. And the operations people really felt that opening the building every day was too much work. It took a half hour to open up the building. And so they kept it closed for the first few months of the building's existence. And then the pandemic hit. And the realization was the only way that we could make safe air was to keep the building open. Now the building is open pretty regularly. And I know this is a really small example, but I think the difference is one of the big differences to meet our sustainability challenge is to have individual designers, individual studios make small decisions like this that add up to a bigger whole. Cities also need to be resilient, and they can be resilient. Resiliency, I think, it might be an overused word right now, but it's incredibly important because we need to deal with maintaining livability and changing or deteriorating conditions. Buildings basically need to do a bigger job of taking care of themselves in the environment. I'm going to show you, and every little building can be part of this resiliency. I'm going to show you an example, a hamburger stand. This is like probably not what most people would consider an important building. But this has to happen at a really small scale. This is a project that we did in Chicago. It's about 2 or 3 years old for McDonald's. It's one of their flagship stores. McDonald's contacted us and they have some very special stores, larger stores. They call them flagships. And they wanted to rebuild the one in Chicago. And their main idea was that they wanted to be a good neighbor. This restaurant is in the River North neighborhood of Chicago, and it suffers from a severe lack of green space. In fact, there are no parks within a 3rd-mile radius of McDonald's site. And it was this observation that gave us our thought about this, that we would design this as the green space that this particular neighborhood lacks, and we would make a park in a city. But we were also challenged by the idea when we started thinking about the park, the restaurant park. We were also challenged by the idea of making an extraordinarily sustainable restaurant in a park. So the first thing we did is sort of the neighborhood scales. We changed the focus of the restaurant. We increased the green space by 72%. Interestingly, by the way, we did offer this. We did not. The client did discuss with the city the idea that this would be a park, but it is now owned by McDonald's. Actually, it's more efficient for the city to have owners have parks than to operate them themselves. And as we worked along, we talking more with McDonald's. We discovered that McDonald's, their major corporate objective is sustainability. If you look at their website, they have a very impressive record for sustainability, but most of it's been really concentrated on their supply chain. And that makes sense because McDonald's, for example, decides they're going to do sustainable potatoes. Every potato grower will pay attention, and their market influence is so great. They're not really worried about their buildings very much, although they're a very big real estate owner. So we challenged them. We said, we would like to make this a LEED Platinum restaurant. And they said, well, we've looked at it before, and we haven't been able to justify it, but try it. So we did. And I want to tell you that again, the idea of incremental design, working at the detail, working at the smaller scale was the key to making this building LEED Platinum. And it is LEED Platinum. A couple of the components, the building, for example, there was an existing building on the site, and we reused 65% of it, the part that's in green here. The most sustainable building is the one that you don't build or don't replace. As part of our park concept, we wanted to provide immediate shade. So we created this solar pergola. Actually, it didn't start out as solar, but as we attempted to create shade, we decided that we would do it by using PV. The building has about 1,000 south-facing PVs. And remarkably, you can see at the bottom of the slide, that's our actual production level. We have about 65% of our load produced by the solar pergola in Chicago. We were really careful to get to the LEED Platinum. We were really careful about carbon, both operational and embodied carbon. And a few of the building technologies that we found useful. This is the first permitted cross-laminated timber building in Chicago. Like I said, this was a few years ago, and there are more buildings now, and I think that there will be even more. This is a material of the future for a lot of different reasons. It's the first time that we had the opportunity to use carbon cure, which is a concrete that has carbon dioxide entrained in it. And when you do something good, usually, or hopefully, someone asks you to do it again. So we were challenged, just as we finished that, we were challenged to do another McDonald's. And McDonald's was really pleased by the idea of having a platinum restaurant, which is another influence that our architects have, is by making suggestions, by having successes like that. I think you introduce the will and the desire to do it again. In any case, we were commissioned to do another flagship restaurant. This one is in a totally different environment. This one's in Orlando, Florida, and McDonald's upped the ante. They said, well, yeah, that one was LEED Platinum. We want this one to be net zero. And this restaurant, just to give you a reference, restaurants, especially fast food restaurants, are extraordinarily high users of energy. There was an existing restaurant on the site, and you can see on this chart that it used 1 million kilowatt hours of energy every year, which is really, really, really high on a square foot basis. And we looked at how much renewable we'd have to put on the site to accommodate 1 million kilowatt hours. We found that we actually couldn't get that much renewable on the site. We'd have to have additional site, which was possible. We could lease it from Disney. But I think that the key to this, though, is not to just provide renewables, but to drive down the energy use. And that was our major idea here. And you can see the column next to the million column. We determined that we thought we could drive it down to about 700,000 kilowatt hours a year. And it was really interesting where those savings were. And I believe firmly that architecture is not just how it looks, it's how it acts. And you can see that the dark green color, the equipment load, is where we could pick up the most efficiency, where we could pick up the most savings. That meant that this wasn't even architecture at all. What we did in the end, by the way, that's cooking load. McDonald's, this particular restaurant has 3 cooking lines. And because McDonald's operates on the theory that they have to serve customers really fast, that's their reason for being, their whole business. All cooking lines are always on. Working with the McDonald's suppliers, we talked about and eventually produced a standby cycle for the cooking lines. And that's where most of that equipment savings is. And that's what made this building able to be net zero. There were some other really interesting spots that I'm going to talk about more. The other one I want you to look at is the yellow cooling. Some of that's refrigeration for food, but a lot of it's cooling people. It's human comfort. In the end, we did get all the PVs on the site. This is a little diagram showing the photovoltaic that we used. We have about, I think there's about 1,000 panels on this too. We use 2 types on the way, by the way. We use bi-PVs, where we have embedded in glass. So we're using this for shade. And then we have conventional solar panels. But going back to the idea of human comfort, we were really intrigued with that idea. On the top of this slide, that top chart shows the Florida climate, and the hours of the day are plotted vertically, and the months of the year are horizontal. And the parts that are red are the times in Florida where you would need to cool, that it's too uncomfortable to just just sit around. We found that if we shaded and ventilated it, we could change that whole equation to the chart below. And we could actually operate this restaurant without cooling a large part of the year. So the little drawing at the bottom is our idea. If we ventilate and if we shade, can we make this restaurant use a lot less energy? In the end, we used really sort of a very traditional for Florida idea. We made this restaurant, made it changeable. And we did it by using jalousies, which have been around. You see the little illustration we have, and Florida forever. What we did though is we automated those jalousies so that when the outside conditions are appropriate, when we're at the right temperature and the right humidity, the building opens itself up and ventilates. And that's where the cooling savings was accomplished. I do want to tell you a funny story about this though. McDonald's is very risk adverse. And they should be. And they have a lot of customers. They were sued once for a hot cup of coffee. It cost them millions. And so their corporate attorneys were worried that people would get their fingers stuck in the jalousie as it closed. And so they're actually, when you go to this restaurant, there's a recording that says, "The building is about to breathe. Please keep your fingers away from the windows," which just shows you can accommodate all kinds of risks. So I think my point is that every piece of architecture counts in our challenge, to meet our challenge to make sustainable architecture to save our planet. And even unlikely building types can be contributors. Resiliency also happens at the city scale. And I want to talk just briefly about the Riverwalk. We worked on the Riverwalk for 16 years, built it in 3 phases. It was an amazing project because we were able to change how people thought about our city and change how our neighbors use the city. It's about 1.5 miles long and about 25 feet wide. It's a very unusual site. And it lines the Chicago River with park spaces that are themed on natural rivers. But what I want to talk to you about are some of the challenges that we had to accomplish a resilient space while we designed the Chicago River. This is one of my favorite spaces. It's in the very center of the Riverwalk. It's called the River Theater. It's an important space because at this point we bent the city down to the water, basically enjoined the city to the water. But what I want to talk to you about is in detailing this, it was really important to make this space resilient, have it contribute to the environment. So underneath the River Theater, we've used that space to store water, rainwater, and then that water is used to irrigate the plants in the parks along the Riverwalk. The other thing we did that's kind of unusual that talks about resiliency is instead of using only small planting areas, almost the entire area underneath the River Theater is media for plants. So that usually you have to replace, these are Gladidia tricanthus, honey locust, our favorite tree. Usually in a city, they're selected because they're so resistant to pollution. Usually in a city, they have to replace though every 10 to 15 years. We're hoping that these can go a lot longer, provide more shade, and make a more resilient city. Another example of how the design of the Riverwalk was required to be resilient is this block, which is called the jetty. The jetty we designed it to talk about river plants, and these are actually floating in the water. We wanted to talk about a typical river environment in Illinois, but below the surface, more is happening. The Chicago River is much cleaner than it has been in the past, but because it's channelized, it was still pretty devoid of any wildlife. The reason was because there was no habitat. So beneath the jetty, what happens is the piers that support the jetty, we've turned those into fish environments by using caisson mounted lunkers where fish can hide, and creating, these are actually plastic hula skirts that create environment for the fish. Basically taking the place of natural environments in this channelized river. And then the plants that we put in also contributed to the resiliency and to making habitat. Basically, in the roots of the floating plants is a biofilm, and that's where the little crustaceans that the fish eat are located. So basically, we've created a fish hotel, a place for fish. And that the lady here, I took her picture. She just caught that river cat in the Chicago River. The river is stocked right now, and people are actually fishing in the Chicago River. A very big change. And it changes, it again, makes this river more resilient. The fish like it. This is a chart that shows you, I have to make a point here, though. A lot of people say, oh, wow, the architecture cleaned up the Chicago River. No, it did not. What happened was a lot of things came together. Again, the idea of design and change being integrated and recognizing the opportunity. Actually, one of the reasons that the river was so sterile was Chicago was chlorinating their sewage to clean it and then returning it to the river chlorinated. Well, fish can't live in chlorinated water. So in 1985, the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District stopped chlorinating water. The other thing that happened is Chicago started storing their stormwater, not necessarily in the river as much. Chicago has a combined storm sanitary. So when it rains, we have the unfortunate occurrence of having sewage in the river. When that became operational, that also increased the livability of the river. But those things, along with initiatives like the Riverwalk, like the jetty, changed the fish population. There were 7 species of fish in the river in 1975. Today, there are over 70, and it is fishable. The river still serves as part of Chicago's stormwater system. And a lot of people, you go down and have wine on the river. You don't understand that this is part of containing stormwater, again, making our city resilient. This photograph was taken 2 weeks after we opened phase 2. It was really pretty funny. The Pulitzer Prize winning critic Blair Kamen from the Chicago Tribune called me and he said, is this a design error? Does this mean the Riverwalk doesn't work? No, actually, the Riverwalk is designed to hold 7 more feet of stormwater. So when we have a big storm, you can see this drawing shows the highest ever. So the Riverwalk is required to be inundated, to design for inundation. One of the requirements, for example, all the materials that we used had to be able to be cleaned by power wash in a very short period of time. We've been thinking also about sustainable infrastructure in one additional way, though, and maybe this is the most important way. If cities are going to be sustainable infrastructure is part of the solution. And what's critical to livable cities is that they are inclusive, that they're just. The Riverwalk, for example, is in the central part of the city. It's in the business district. And commercially, it's an amazing success. The city spent about $200 million building this 1.5 mile long park, which compared to the investment since 2008 when the first phase opened is just minuscule. You can see these are the buildings that have been constructed along the Riverwalk since then. But the other thing that's true about Chicago is we have a city that's not always equitable and not always just. The Riverwalk, by the way, is in the center of the screen. I'm not getting my cursor up here, but anyway, Chicago has 34 miles of lakefront, but it's really concentrated only on the east side of the city. And there are inner city neighborhoods, kids from inner city neighborhoods that can't get to the lakefront easily. It's just not possible. It's not part of their daily living environment. I think part of equitable cities is that the system of green space and recreation space, education and transportation is distributed evenly through the city. So while we have 35 miles of wonderful green park on the lakefront, we have 155 miles of riverfront. I think one of the big successes of the Riverwalk is it made people aware of what could happen. We participated in a project simultaneously, by the way, to the Riverwalk design for the Metropolitan, for Metropolitan Planning Council of Chicago, which was commissioned by the city to write a vision for the rivers, to realize what these rivers could be, how they could contribute to the livability of cities. One of our pieces was to talk to individual neighborhoods about their riverfront and envision ways they could use it. This is in the Little Village neighborhood of Chicago. Originally very industrial, you can sort of tell from the slide. There is a canal called the Collateral Channel that was constructed when the river was still a major manufacturing industrial thoroughfare. And these little inland canals were constructed to serve factories. They're pretty unused right now, and the area is changing from industrial to residential. We met in that park that's at the top of the screen. It was a new park constructed by the city for this neighborhood. And there were some really smart teenage kids in the audience. We asked everybody what they thought, and the teenage boys said, well, you know, that canal smells so bad, we call it Ass Creek. So we decided we could turn this into Asset Creek. As we studied, we discovered that the biggest problem here is sediment. A lot of it with organic waste from earlier industrial periods that's creating methane, and that, along with the stagnation, is creating the bad environment. So if we encapsulate the muck, which is at the very bottom of the slide, and we circulate the water in the river, we could change this. If we went farther and we constructed wetlands and other plants that could mitigate some of the pollution, we'd go even farther. Our vision was to turn this not from Ass Creek into an asset. And this hasn't happened. But the challenge is, can we make these spaces into the spaces that we need to make cities livable? So they wouldn't just have a new park, they'd also have a river swimming pool. I think that another place that we found our work is inspired by equity is the work we do for transportation systems increase inclusivity. Our cities need to be walkable. They need to be more than walkable. You have to get to work. You have to get to see your family. So we have to remake the infrastructure. In Chicago, that often means building into the existing system. These are both replacement stations that, interestingly, they had been eliminated. They'd been demolished by the city in the 50s and 60s, when planners thought that this type of transportation would become obsolete with the advent of the interstate and automobiles. As it turned out, both of these stations are some of the fastest growing neighborhoods in the city. This shows you, it's funny, but these stations are among the oldest, and they were both demolished. These are the neighborhoods they're in. One is McCormick Place, the other is River North. And like I said, they're some of the largest growth areas in the city with the most development. But building in existing neighborhood, again, making these cities equitable is not always easy. And the design solutions can be really challenging and a really big contributor to the sustainability of the city. I'm going to show you these stations really quickly because I think it's impressive how they seem to have the same brief, but they're really different in their challenges. In a lot of ways, the solutions are the same. For example, we've used the same palette of materials here. A durable palette, glass and stainless steel, really works for CTA. But the other challenges, we found different solutions. One of the challenges for CTA is, especially working on an existing elevated structure. This elevated structure was built in 1892 to be precise. And it doesn't meet modern day loading requirements if we would add the platforms back in. So for almost every station we have to find new ways to structure the improvements. In this case, for this station at Morgan Street, what we did is we actually underpinned every single one of those vents. So they have new foundations, but we use the existing 1890 structure. I'm going to show you now another station. This one is in, this one's at near McCormick Place. It's the Sir McCormick Place station. Here we had the same problem. It's existing platform built in the 1890s. It also could not take the station loads. But we thought about this one a different way. One of the reasons we thought about this in a different way is our construction area was so limited. We had no layoff area, and we had very little space to make this new structure. But the way we thought about it is we needed a canopy. You can see in the middle illustration, we needed 14 feet of canopy. We needed windbreaks. We decided that if we would put those together, we would be able to take enough load off the structure that we could support this new canopy on a new structure. So in this one, unlike the Morgan station, we built a new set of concrete vents. You can see them in the bottom illustration that work alongside the existing steel vents, the 1890 steel vents. Same problem, really a different solution. One of the things that directed us to this solution is making this constructible by building the canopies and the windbreaks as a tube. We could fabricate that to a large extent off-site and to some extent right at the site and lift it into place. This is important working in an urban environment because this is an active train line. So every time that you interrupt the train, you have to flag and stop traffic. And so this became a really good solution that created the least amount of disruption. This slide shows that too, and then the new vents and the old vents, but really different solutions. So these are great problems for architects. I really try to encourage people to think creatively. Projects like this, when they come up, a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, it's just a station. There's no design here. You don't need any design, or you don't even need architects. The critical talent that architects have is the ability to think about a lot of things at once. Sometimes people express that as a negative. They say, well, engineers, they know everything they possibly can about their field. And architects just know a little bit about everything. That's the key. We have the ability to see the vision. We really like working on parks. This is a park in Rogers, Arkansas, because parks are one of the fastest ways to make a city green and livable and equitable. So quickly looking at this one, I wanted to talk a little bit about equitable design. One of the things that we find most valuable is engagement. In fact, we try to have our clients include engagement for our public projects. And actually in Rogers, that was the reason they selected our studio to do the work, is because we were very enthusiastic about getting the community engaged. These are slides from one of our engagement activities. For example, we sat in the farmers market with a table along with the other vendors, and we solicited people's opinion about Rogers and about the park. It was an all-day event. Rogers was really interesting. It was born as a whistle stop and on the Santa Fe, and we found that one of the things that really is important is the park has to belong to the community that it's in. And in our engagements, the one I showed you plus other ones that we did, we found out that they really wanted that this city is one of 4 cities in Northwest Arkansas: Bentonville, Fayetteville, Springdale, and Rogers. This town wanted to have their own identity, and they wanted it to be an authentic identity. So that became one of the major objectives of our design. They were born as a rail stop. There's a natural spring nearby, so this is where the freight trains loaded up on water steam. And our park, by the way, still has a train that goes right through it. That middle of the park is a train track, an active rail line. And we decided that the park should celebrate that. And so we kept it, like we couldn't get rid of it anyway, but we worked with it and made it part of this park design. We wanted to be authentic. We wanted to talk about their rail routes. This is one of our major pieces. This, by the way, the farmers market moved into here. I want to go to the next slide. This is the children's play area that we developed along the railroad. And you can see that the theme for the children's play area is it's the railroad. It's a railroad. It's a rail stop. We actually rebuilt the water stops, the water towers. Our first thought was, well, we'll just build water towers and then you could have a chain underneath it. It gets really hot in Arkansas in the summer. Kids could cool off by pulling the chain. In the end, this is far more sophisticated than that. It is a bona fide water play area. By the way, the towers are decorated by artists. The project was funded in part by the Walton Family Foundation, and they have an amazing art program. But you can see other pieces, theme pieces. Paint cars are made out of steel pipe. So we use steel pipe to create playground equipment. One of the other components of the park is a performance area, a performance venue. Sustainability is really important in a couple ways. That building in the back was a farm implement store. We've recycled it as a green room and back of house. And right now, we built the canopy in front, but right now this is a really popular park. It seats as many as 5,000 people for concerts, 2 or 3 times a week during the summer. And it's become the authentic center of community that we talked about at our very initial engagements. I like to show this slide because I'm not sure that when we do a design, we ever think about them decorated like this. But when I see it, I'm always really glad because I think that acceptance, making spaces beloved and really useful to people's everyday lives is really the key to good architecture and sustainable environments. So yes, we do have Christmas lights all over our canopies. Actually, Santa Claus comes on the train and is dropped off at this park. We also developed a system of graphics for them, and they have adopted that totally. You can see them here. This is the last project I'm going to show you, and it's a project that we're currently working on, and I do want to talk about it, especially about justice and equitability, because a lot of times architecture design tells a story, and the story enables people to be part of their community. This is a park that we've recently been commissioned to do. We're doing it, by the way, as a DuSable Park Design Alliance. I have a wonderful partner, Rabona Westbrook at Brook Architecture, working with me. But in a lot of ways, I'm not supposed to use this word because we don't have a founder, but it's a founder's park because it's dedicated to Jean-Baptiste Pont DuSable. Here are some of our ideas for the park. In a lot of ways, it's a contemplative space. It wants to remind people of the lakefront, the power of the lakefront. We're introducing some wetlands. Chicago, like a lot of cities, is built in a really swampy, low area. And we want this park to remind people of what Chicago was like. And by the way, the park will be constructed. We're starting construction at the end of 24, hopefully. It'll be constructed into 25 and 26. But this park has been really important to a lot of people. And I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned about what people want it to say and what we've learned about Chicago and how we can be a community together. Recently, we were invited to participate in the Chicago Architectural Biennial, which just ended just this week, by the way. The theme was, "This is not a rehearsal," but our particular project, in a way, was because we used our invitation to talk about what DuSable Park could be and what it will be. This was the piece that appeared in the Cultural Center, and we were really impressed by a few things. One is that how Chicago has changed. The original shoreline of Lake Michigan it's the brown tan color, and all the other pieces of this drawing are additions to the shoreline. And DuSable's farm is a little white square in the upper left piece, and our park is on the right. And we found this layering, these parallel histories, really important to how we thought about the park. So I'm going to show you the installation that we made. for the biennial. And I want to show it to you because when we did it, we were really talking about, and we were asking really what this park needs to be, what the city needs to be to its citizens to be the inclusive place of the future. So this is that's a park site, and you can see our installation for the biennial. We thought that our design and the park had to ask two questions. Obviously, the people who use the park answer the questions, but one is, who was DuSable? And by the way, this is the picture of the installation. This little cube that says, who was DuSable? I'm going to tell you what that is in a second. It's really interesting, even though DuSable is the is recognized as the first non-Indigenous inhabitant of Chicago, we know almost nothing about him. We know that he was an explorer. Explorers were really important to Chicago. In fact, the reason Chicago is important is because of its river, and the first people who arrived in Chicago were exploring the river. This is a map from 1674, New France, and if you can see that what's unique about Chicago is that at the junction of the Mississippi watershed, the Mississippi River, and the Atlantic watershed. You can see the St. Lawrence going into Lake Huron and to Lake Michigan. Chicago is important because this is where you could exchange goods and material. It's easier to do that in Chicago than any other place on the planet. And that's the reason for Chicago's explosive growth, where I started today. But we actually don't know much about DuSable. There aren't any records of his life prior to 1770. We know he arrived in Chicago in 1790. We don't know the date. It's about then. In 1800, he sold his property to John Kinsey. He died in 1818. We know that. We have a record of that. We think his mother was an enslaved Haitian woman, and his father was a Frenchman. So he was, by the standards of then and now, a black man. This little drawing was done actually in, I think it was about 1930. It was for the for the Century of Progress. And the artist envisioned DuSable living in a little cabin. Like I said, we didn't know much about him. But one of the things we do know about him is we know what he owned, because when he sold his estate to Kinsey, the bill of sale was recorded in Detroit. This is a bill of sale. It's written in French, by the way, and you don't have to read it. But this is it in English translated. He was a really rich man. He had a house that was 40 feet by 22 feet. He had 12 outbuildings. He had multiple heads of cattle that went with this, many chickens. Historians estimate that his estate, it was sold, by the way, for I'm trying to remember, 6,000 pounds. But the today value would be between $1.5 and $2 million. So this guy was rich with a big house. We want to impress that on the people of Chicago, that our roots are trading and that DuSable was successful. So one of the things we're doing in the park, for example, this footprint is the size of his house. And then we're representing his house by graphically listing what he owned. So we want to tell people about DuSable. Oh, by the way, we do also have a record of his marriage. He was married to Native American, to a Potawatomi woman. We also want the park to remind people that we aren't the first people here, and we're not the original occupants. That this land was occupied for over 800 years before DuSable got there by basically three tribes: the Potawatomi, the Odawa, and the Ojibwe. And so we're representing those three tribes with very gentle lights here, burning campfires. This little aerial shows the extent of what his holdings would have been, his outbuildings and his main house. But the other question that we want the park to answer, not to answer, but to ask, we want people to answer, is who found Chicago? When we first put this on site, we got comments back, oh, don't you mean who founded Chicago? No, we don't. We mean who found Chicago. I think that the livability of the city, along with the realization that you're part of this community is really what makes cities successful. So we really mean who found Chicago. For example, my grandmother found Chicago. She found it in 1912. She was an immigrant. She had $25. She was fleeing poverty in Europe that was unbelievably oppressive. And she found Chicago. Who else found Chicago? How did your people find Chicago? And what are you going to make it for the future? And I think it's really important that architecture takes on those questions and helps people at least understand the question. Of course, the answer is individual, but when we realize the answer together and where we can go, that's what will make it a sustainable and vibrant city. And so the city that's safe, resilient, and inclusive. So I think I'm ready for questions. Thank you very much for listening to me. Am I supposed to stop share now? You wanted to see faces, right?
Yes, please.
Ah, there we go.
Carol, thank you for that. It's every bit what I had expected from this presentation. This year, we're looking at the future of architecture and engineering. I think what you've presented, and as you went through the projects, they're incredible projects. When you talk about sustainability, safe, resilient, inclusive, I think you've covered it all, but you've covered it off in a way that isn't just a presentation. You've actually lived this, and these are not small projects. These are research assignments that everyone that's on this call will recognize as being real pieces that people can take away and work with. And the influence of architects, certainly comes across, and they're not just individual projects. You can tell by how passionate you are about each one of these projects and what people can take away from them. So, congratulations on not just the projects, but the whole portfolio that you have and your entire life. And I must say, it probably started from the very beginning, and your work probably in Costa Rica and the planning there and everything that you've done. But I'm not going to ask you questions right away, because I'm going to bring on someone to join us. And if he'll turn on his camera, I'd like to introduce Reed Kroloff, who is the Dean of the College of Architecture at Illinois Institute of Technology in Chicago. Dean is a leader in the fields of architecture, urbanism, and design. Dean Kroloff co-founded Jones Kroloff, a practice that develops design strategy and guides architect selection processes. The recipient of the American Academy in Rome's 2003 Rome Prize Fellowship, Reed Kroloff also served as editor-in-chief of Architecture magazine. Additionally, Kroloff directed the Cranbrook Academy of Art and Art Museum in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan, and was dean of Toulouse University School of Architecture in New Orleans, which he led through Hurricane Katrina and its recovery. He holds degrees from the University of Texas at Austin and Yale University. He has served on numerous boards and advisory councils, ranging from the Chicago Architecture Foundation to the Register of Peer Professionals of the United States General Service Administration. Welcome, Reed.
Thank you. It's nice to see you again, Sylvia. Is my audio working?
Yes, it is. And you're
terrific.
coming out loud and clear, and lovely to see you again. So, Reed, I'm going to turn this over to you, because I'm sure that you have a few questions for Carol.
I have 36 questions for Carol.
Perfect.
But I do want to say to start by saying thank you, Sylvia, to you for coming up with the idea of NORRED along with your colleagues. I know you're very quick to credit other people in the office, and we're beneficiaries of NORR's generosity here in Chicago, with NORR staff as part of our board of advisors and working with our students. And so the firm has touched this School of Architecture in many wonderful ways. And I just want to say thank you for that.
Thank you for those words. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. It's also nice to be back. I think this is the third time I've gotten to do one of these. Eventually, the folks at NORR are going to boot me out. But I'm particularly honored to be doing this today with Carol, who I have known for many, many years, and too many, right? And I just want to quickly say to the folks watching, the over 100 people watching here today at NORR, and NORR's guests, because I know we have folks from the outside as well, that I could have had this same conversation with Carol 25 years ago. That she is not a Janie come lately to this subject matter. I remember the first building we published of Carol's, the magazine. Many of these issues were at the front then, and that was in 1998 maybe, certainly in the last century. Carol was already actively engaged in these subject matters. So for everybody who's watching and listening today, what you're seeing, I think, and I think a little of her gold medal has to do with not only her being a really good designer and her office being full of very good designers. That's always important. But someone who's beaten a drum for a long time and tried to beat that drum, stretch the metaphor a little bit, with a rhythm that people could pick up on, and just kept coming back to it and back to it and back to it. And that is a form of sustainability, of sustained practice in a way, from which we all benefit. So thank you, Carol, for doing that kind of work for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I want to jump right into it in that regard. I don't want to start with a single building or a project that you showed. I want to go to a larger kind of set of questions. And the first one to help folks with is, what percentage do you think of your work over the last 20, 30, 40 years even has been in the public realm?
That's a good question. I don't know. It's not always in the public realm, but I would guess that probably 90% is.
Okay.
Ironically, that it was a pretty conscious choice. My first partner, Jim Jankowski, and I used to sit around thinking, well, where are we going to get the next commission? I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have had that experience. Oh man, is the next commission going to come? And we did have some offers that were really attractive, like, someone would ask us to do a rec room addition or a small house remodel. And those are really honorable jobs, but we decided that we really wanted to work on stuff that we felt ownership for, that we felt more engaged as designers when we felt like we were the owners too. And that's how I think about public architecture. I feel that I need to do my very best work because it's mine also. I feel obligated. It's mine in the sense of my community, but it's mine in the sense this is the chance I get to do things right. And if I don't do them right, I'm not trying hard enough. So we turned down the porch editions and the TV room editions. And our first commissions, quite honestly, were quite public, but they were likely to be parking lots or toilet rooms. But it was a choice that we made. And I haven't really regretted it, because I still believe that when I'm sitting at the table as an architect, I'm also sitting at the table as a citizen. And that's a really important differential to make for me. I feel much more empowered when I remind myself of that than when I'm just, you can't deny that architecture is a service, but it's also a profession. And both those ideas when you're working.
And
by the way, we have.
Oh, go ahead.
We have worked for some McDonald's, for example, is not
private client, yeah,
a public client, and we worked for some others lately too. But even those clients, When they talk to us, most of the time they ask us about their public spaces, which I think is good, because if they feel that they have a stewardship of the public environment, it can't be anything but good.
Absolutely. And it's partly why I wanted to start out with this question, because a lot of the people watching today are architects, clearly, and NORR is not a small firm, right? It's a large firm. But I don't think you would suggest in your firm I would describe as on the large side of small, or the small side of large,
Yeah, we have
right?
yeah, our studio, we have our size, the biggest we've ever been is 65. We're at 50 right now. And the smallest we've ever been is 2. I mean,
Yeah, two when you
it's
started. Yeah.
usually, it's just, yeah, like that. I'm really confident. I have to tell you that we've talked about that pretty extensively too, is what size should our studio be? Because I think since we don't have a market sector that we work in exclusively, I think that intimacy is pretty important. So we've always had trouble getting to have more members than we have now. And not that we have trouble getting more members, we have trouble maintaining the quality that we want. I think it's possible though. I haven't put it off the table.
Yeah, yeah. When just to give people a couple of quick facts, and then I want to run right back to that issue of practice and profession. How was Ross Barney Jankowski the first firm you opened that was your own office?
Yeah, Jim joined me about 6 months after we started.
Okay,
So
and when did you open that office?
It was 81.
81. Okay,
I was out of school for 10 years or something like that. It was really stupid. I can't believe I did it.
And just to give people a little more background, when you graduated, and you graduated from the University of Illinois in what has turned out to be a pretty remarkable, pretty impressive group of people graduating right around you. Did you come straight to Chicago to work?
No, I was in the Peace Corps.
So Peace Corps followed college. Okay.
Yeah, they were sitting in the. I think one of the things that people, again, everybody on this call will probably share, is architecture is really affected by the economy, and in a lot of cases, it's regarded as a luxury item. So we have these economic cycles that are just like insistent and constant. And so when I graduated, there wasn't much work, and I was walking through the Illini Union. There's a table recruiting Peace Corps volunteers, and I signed up. I sent in the application. I put in that the only place I didn't want to go was Latin America. And a week later, I got a call, and they said, "Would you like to be a volunteer in Costa Rica?" And I thought to myself, I didn't know where it was. I'm a 20-year-old idiot. I didn't know where it was, and so it sounded really Latin to me. So I said, "Can I call you back?" So I looked in my atlas, because we didn't have internet back then, the dark ages. And sure enough, it was like not only was it was right in the middle of the Americas. It's like the center point of the Americas. But the assignment was, I think, looking back, it was just a really fortuitous assignment. I was assigned to a group, an interdisciplinary group. It included botanists, biologists, park planners, writers to support the National Parks of Costa Rica, which was a very beginning organization. I worked for the first director of the Parks System, Costa Rica. And two things that I didn't know then that became part of my practice, my studio, my belief of what architects are happened there in Costa Rica. One is we were working with, we were reconstructing ecologies that had been destroyed by agriculture and making parks out of them. Costa Rica is one of the most diverse ecologies on the planet because it's on the Atlantic Pacific Flyway. So more birds, for example, are in Costa Rica some time of the year than in the whole of the United States. Anyway, so the idea that that an environment could be destroyed and that it needed to be reconstructed is like exactly what we're learning now when we talk about rebuilding cities in a sustainable fashion. So that like wow, we had talked about energy efficiency in college, but it wasn't at that sort of like system level. I didn't understand it that way. And then the second thing is I was the only architect. I was working with every other type of expert that you needed for a part. And it's so funny because I had spent 5 years working with other architects, people just like me. And all of a sudden I had to take these people's expertise, their information and knowledge, and assemble it. I mean, because that's what we are. We're the editors. We're the assemblers. And so those two experiences, I thought when I was going to Costa Rica, I would be, building mud huts or schools or whatever, water systems. It didn't turn out to be anything like that, but it was absolutely formative to what I could do when I got out. There's a long explanation, sorry.
No. It's all fitting exactly into the description of how you've come to be, which is what I've organized the questions into 3 categories, and the first category, I think it's already become clear, is about what does it mean to have a radical practice? What does it mean to have a practice organized in this way? And how did Carol Ross Barney come to be that? And so when you got back from the Peace Corps and went to work in architectural offices, was this already taking root or in you, having had those experiences in the Peace Corps? Did you bring with you that experience into the practice, not your own, but before you opened your own offices? Were you already itching?
Well, I have to say, I think that especially the people of my generation, I was really receptive to this. I mean, I'm a child of the 60s and 70s, which was tremendous disruption in the United States. But also, there's a time where people felt they could really make change and do anything. I mean, if you start in 62 with Kennedy's inaugural, he tells people, don't ask what you get, do something. Or if you go later, through like just the entire movement of the late 60s and early 70s, where people said, we can change this. We can, we don't have to fight wars that we don't want to fight. We can change this. So I think that I was particularly receptive to the idea that the world was a system that needed to be, I don't know, if you didn't contribute, you weren't doing your job. So I was really receptive to that. But when I got back to the States, I got a job. I needed a job really bad. My husband was in graduate school at the University of Chicago, and the tuition is not little. And I interviewed at every big Chicago firm. They were quite interesting. But I took a job at Halliburton Root. And in a lot of ways, I suppose people wouldn't say that that's the hotbed of radicalism. I mean, it's the oldest practice in Chicago. But the people I landed up working there were really, it's not encouragement. It's just, where you can get a synergy with those people. And that went down to, especially, I mean, John Halliburton is one of my mentors. He is the grandson of the first Halliburton. It was a generational family firm. There's no Halliburtons currently leading the firm, but when there was then. And I think his ability to talk about things that I was interested in, and encouraged me to think those things was really important. In fact, his thing was when I was working at Halliburton, there are a lot of people there, 300. I think they're not quite that large now. And they had all in-house disciplines, but it was for the time, it was a big office. And John he was really solicitous of my career. He worked very closely with me. And I didn't get the best commissions at Halliburton Root to work on. I mean, I had a lot of other designers, and if I was being honest, I probably maybe got the last one that got into the office. But he was so good to me. He said, Carol, these are the noble clients that really need your help. So, being already a bleeding heart, it was perfect. I love these noble clients. But he wasn't just saying that. He was serious about it. And so really when I was working there, I worked largely in the public sector and in the public realm. And it was because it was part because of the mentorship I got and the leadership I got, and his desire to do good work for our noble clients.
That's great. So this all kind of came about quite, I know it's hindsight makes it look almost planned, right? Every single time your path of
Yeah.
of your career, but there were hints and pieces all along the way. So when you think about this, one of the things that you've done as long as I've known you, has been not only to, have a firm that consistently has a group of young professionals in it. You run your office often, or at least my experience of your office is it's an incubator office for young designers. But you also teach, and you've taught here for us at IIT long before I got here. You've taught here for many, 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 many years. And so, based on that, and that's clearly a commitment to public service in both directions, how do you talk to young people in your office, in our school, when you give one of your many, many direct, conversations like this or lectures? How, how do you encourage them to to build a practice around this notion of public service, or this notion of the word you used, radical sustainability, was one of them, right? How do you encourage people to think that it's possible to do this?
Oh, I think teaching is a two-way street. I do it because I get a lot out of it. And one of the reasons I get a lot out of it is I think that people who pursue architecture are, especially the ones that actually make it and stay with it, are inevitably idealists and optimists. So actually, I don't have to encourage them to be those things. I just have to suggest ways that they'll get there. And so there are a couple things that I think that that I think are important. I think one of the things that you get a studio, and you know this because you're the guy who does it. Our studios are leveled. You don't get everybody who's like an amazing, got an A in the last studio, and you get some people who probably hate design studios more than anything on the planet. And I think for me, the realization that architecture is a team sport, that it needs everybody's best efforts. I talk about that a lot. I talk about the fact that ultimately, although in a studio you're trying to find your own talents, ultimately the reason you have to find what you're good at is that ultimately you're not going to be the guy who does everything, but you're going to find the person who's your complement, the one who fills in your gaps. And so I think just the realization, you have to realize what you do well and what you're interested in within architecture. You're already an idealist and an optimist, but within that. And then the second thing is, I think that sometimes maybe it's particularly prominent in school when you're going to hear great lectures and you're reading, online, the latest stars in architecture, whatever. It seems like there's only one way to be successful. You have to be the designer or the litigator if you were in law. And that's not true at all, because I'm really good at some things. I'm really bad, spectacularly bad at others. I'd say just because those things bore me, but it's probably I'm not very good at them. But in any case, I ask them what gets them excited. I ask them to find their fun, and then they should build their talents, gather talents around that fun. But because architecture is teamwork, for example, my partners in the studio, we try never to become a administrator. In fact, we've talked about the idea of abolishing the title of project manager, because what's a project manager? That it's important to keep doing what your inline talent is, what your fun is. I don't know if we're always successful at it, but it is our objective. For example, one of my partners is he's happiest when he's in the field. I mean, he likes the rest of architecture, but if I left him in one place, it'd be in the mud. And so you hate to take out that part. You should never take out that part of your career. Plus, he's better at it than anybody else. So why can't he fill other people's gaps? So I emphasize that it's teamwork, and that you really have to find your fun.
And so it's one thing. Well, let's talk about then within that fun, within that sort of building of fun. Let's slide a little into the sustainability conversation. How do you bring it into your practice? Is it there from the very beginning on every single project? It's the first thing you think of. Is, other than the client, obviously. Is there?
No, we actually think about it before our clients.
Before the client. So
I do.
tell us about that.
Mm. One of the things I think that's hard about architecture, it was hard for me when I was figuring out what I believe, is in fact, if you look at a typical design process, it's like there in spades. The first part is, we call it, I don't know, programming or whatever you want. And you are really solicitous, like almost like being an analyst of your client's ideas. And you have to be, because without that, you can't start. But there's this point where you make a shift and you're no longer the analyst. I mean, you are, but basically you've collected the data and you shift from this analysis function to a synthesis function. You put this together. And at that point, it's really, this is going to sound a little bit arrogant maybe, but at that point, your client isn't the expert anymore. They're the expert on what they know and what they need. And so maybe they're the expert during analysis, and making that shift, to make that shift successfully, is really, 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 really hard. And I think some architects never make it. They still remain the analyst, and they never become the synthesizer. So in a way, they're depriving their clients of their expertise. Now, you could do it, maybe, I was saying, oh, Carol, she's talking about the arrogant architect that just does what they want. I'm not talking about that. I am talking about if you don't know more than your client at the point where that shift has to be made, you're not doing what they paid you for. But it's hard. And not everybody does it successfully, or there's measures of success. And I imagine some people overdo it. It's like,
And when let's tilt it just toward the client side for a minute. It's hard, right? You just said you've got to develop expertise, bring it to the problem, et cetera, et cetera. And how do you sell a client and let's be really specific. How do you sell a client like the CTA or anybody's CTA? CTA, sorry folks, that's the Chicago Transit Authority. Or the Denver Transit Authority, or Denver Area Rapid Transit, or whoever, MARTA, Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority, right? Whichever system you're working with, how do you sell them? They're all working on the tightest budgets, the taxpayers looking right over their shoulders. There's politicians flying around them like insects around used, old food. I mean, how do you actually cut through all that, first of all, and then secondly, how do you get them to spend that money when they don't think they have it?
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple really things I believe right now after doing this, but I might change these beliefs. Who knows? But the first thing is I don't think that any project is the synthesis. Money is as much part of it as anything else, and they usually do have enough money. So, for example, those stations. When we start a station project, the minimum of those stations is $50 million, and they're tiny. There's a lot of money that goes into stations. So if a project's budgeted correctly, it's rarely because the lack of design excellence is rarely because lack of money. It's because it doesn't have the right the right situation didn't occur. I'm not going to blame the architect. I'm not going to blame the owner. Politicians, I refuse to talk about. They're totally out of control. But the reason they're out of control is because they're not involved in the project. They're kind of like helicoptering in every now and then for reasons that are not legitimate reasons, which is sort of the key. I think for us, the idea is that everybody is at the table and they're there for their legitimate reason. And legitimacy for us, it's what we know, our experience, and what we know professionally. That's what we're legitimately there for. And clients are legitimately there for the things they really need. And sort of being open about that legitimacy, sometimes it's not what you just like, it's what you really need. And then I personally believe that there should be a seat at the table for maybe unseen, but for what society needs. And for right now, that would be including sustainability or equality. Those would be things that are legitimately at the table. And so to get support to make good work in public architecture, I think that when you have to realize those legitimate needs. And then the next step that we really believe in, and we sort of got this from GSA and Postal Service, when you saw everybody, again, I'm talking to architects, so I know that you know this, you have these contracts where you have to do 3 designs. I think that came about because they didn't want the first idea that popped out into your head. I don't know, or they thought that they sort of like competition. It has to be competitive and, bid. Anyway, so usually written into a contract, there'll be 3 designs. We think that if you can establish this universe of legitimate needs, there's not just 3 good designs in there. There's probably hundreds. So generally what we do is we try to pick 3 designs from that universe that are radically different. And I used to answer questions. People say, well, Carol, your work doesn't have a signature. What does that mean? Well, it means that I think that there's a lot of good answers out there. My job is to find 3 of them if the contract calls for it. Maybe 4, I'll give them a freebie. But in any case, we like them to be radically different. And in the office, traditionally, we've called the one that everybody knows is on the table. We call that the dumb idea. Yeah, everybody knows it. It's a big dumb idea. And then we try to find, in this universe of answers, we try to find an answer that is 180 degrees from the dumb idea. Like we question everything in the dumb idea, see if it's in the essential world of criteria, and do one that has we keep all the essentials, we change the stuff around it, and then we try to do one that's 180 degrees from that. And they will look really, really different. And it's fun to do that. First of all, it's fun if you're an architect. It's great fun to do. But the benefit, I think, to the process is it gets a deeper understanding from people who are not architects. Another question you get all the time is, did you think about this? Of course I thought about this. It's been my life for the last year. I thought about everything. Of course I thought about it. But you can't say that. But anyway, what we find is coming out of that, there generally will be. I never take a solution into a meeting that I don't want to build. That is a kiss of death. Like you have been a peer for GSA, for OBO, and I see people do that. And it's like, you're crazy because you know which one they're going to pick. If you take one that you don't want to build, that's going to be the one that they pick. And you're going to be stuck building something you hate. But so we only go with ones we love. But what happens is when clients can vote, they can have a favorite. Although I can't have a favorite, they can have a favorite. And what that gains for me and for the design team is that then we have an advocate instead of a client, because it becomes their answer. So it's very deliberate in sort of a roundabout way. And I truly believe that for any problem, there are You see this in design competitions when you can't make up your mind. Like all these guys have different ideas and they're wonderful. Why can't you make those? Why can't you go in with 3 ideas that you really want to build? So
And
that's how I do it. The
I
second
think
thing is if you say something, if you really believe something, and you say it once and your client says no, you owe it to them to at least bring it up 2 or 3 more times,
with
which
the hope
is
that
not
it,
part
with
of
the
the
hope that
service
it, yeah,
profession
that
at
it,
all.
yeah,
It's not understood the first time necessarily.
that's the difference between a service and a profession,
I
right?
can't tell you,
You're professing.
we often are the design architect and we'll work with, I love working with associate architects, by the way. I've worked with very few architects I've not been able to have absolutely amazing relationships with, but often they'll say, well, Carol, the client told you no. But the point is he didn't understand what I said. At least that's my excuse.
Let's scale it up a little bit now, because we were just talking about a project like a CTA station. Even that's a sort of limited, if you will, it's an object, right? On a line of other objects. Let's jump up to the river for a minute, right? Because there, when you say you know that there's lots of pieces, there you actually have a project that is discontinuous in places just because of the nature of the thing, right? And was built over an extended period of time, and with, one presumes, different leadership in place at various times of the process. Two questions, they're related to this. Did you start with someone there, whoever was your kind of, I'm the mayor obviously would be the sort of ultimate boss on something like that, but whoever you're working with on the day-to-day basis, did they start with a vision, a notion of where they wanted to go with this thing? Number one. And number two, for you, again, with the back to the issue of sustainability, you showed us the fish farm and some of those other things. How did you have to infuse that, like with the CTA station? Did you have to bring that to them, or were they ready for that and already talking about that?
Um, that's an interesting question. Yeah, they were ready for it, but they're ready for different parts. On the Riverwalk is an example. I worked for 2 mayors, hugely different mayors. I started working for Mayor Daley, and I landed up working for Ram, and really different clients. Both of them somewhat inspirational in their own. But I don't think if I would have depended on them for anything but the big picture, I would have got it. But they were both super valuable. I mean, in the city, when Daley was mayor, nothing got done without Daley's attention. He wasn't really a profuse guy. Like he never reviewed the Riverwalk hands on. Someone would present it to him. And then when I'd see him and maybe a luncheon, he'd say, oh, that was nice or something like that. But it wasn't like, a real active client relationship. But he did that with all his projects. There weren't any that weren't that way. He preferred to work through his staff. And Ram Emanuel is one of the best clients I ever had, but he is crazy. Everything you heard about him is totally true. And his enthusiasm was, you could catch it. It was contagious. And he was super hands-on, he'd pick crazy things and say, do this. But both of them are only, their vision was at this, sort of like upper, not higher, 1,000-foot view. On the other hand, one of the people most instrumental at making this project a success is a woman planner who works for the city. Her name is Michelle Woods, and she worked through the project the whole time. The stuff she was good at and that she inspired is not the same things that Ram and Richie inspired at all. So my job was to fill the gaps, to put those in the same universe and find a solution that worked on both sides. I also reserve the the right to throw away ideas that aren't legitimate. Like sometimes there's some things I'm not always successful. One of the blocks on the Riverwalk, I think, it's the one that's called the River Plaza. We thought it should have had a lot more vegetation, and Michelle wanted to rent it for corporate parties. She was interested in how we paid back the loan. And so it doesn't have the vegetation, the plants that we thought it should have. And it's never had a corporate party either. I consider that a failure, but it's a minor failure. It's not at least the whole project. So I'm not always successful, but it's that type of integration that you have to have client to at level of client. It's almost, it's organic. Every team is different. The one thing that I believe is constant, though, is the architect, the designer's role is as the editor and the innovator and the identifier of risk. And the amount that you have to do depends on the rest of the team. I wish I could give a real formulaic straight answer, but it's not.
No, and we're not really looking for a formula, but you may not be hearing it, but in your own description, there's a methodology that's coming out very clearly in what you're saying, which is maybe it's radical, maybe it's not. Maybe the radicality of it is the application of it to the public sector, but of identifying the problem quickly, finding the potential ways of enriching or infusing it with the issues, the difficult challenges of building a sustainable urban project or sustainable urban future, if you will, and inspiring people with it to the extent that they're willing to take the risk. I mean, you keep saying that in different ways. So, and I've been trying to pull that out of you today. I think it's pretty obvious. Pull that out of you today so that people on this call can hear it, right? Young, and I'm particularly interested. I'm not prejudiced toward the young, except of course I do work at a school of architecture, so maybe I am. But we have a whole generation of young architects who can look to you as someone who has blazed the path for them. And you're not Superwoman. You're a person, and you built a practice in the normal way. And yet you found a passion that you were able to apply yourself, to which you were able to apply yourself, and just continue to, as I said before, beat that drum through every single project, and have created a portfolio that I think is just full of incredible richness. I love the fact that we can talk about one side of it. We're dealing with a major public infrastructure project, the park, the river walk, and on the other side, we're having French fries outside of McDonald's, right? And we're still dealing with the same material. And so I would turn to Silvio and say, Silvio, and to the 90 people on this call, I don't know how you're going to get a stronger example of this in our profession, someone who peels away all of the layers of, oh, it's some kind of magic trick that I've been doing, by saying, nope, nothing magic about it. This is just, you go to work and you do it, and you can still make extraordinary change. And I say to your 90, 80, whatever it is, people on this call, get out there and do it yourselves. Carol's shown you how to do it.
Yeah, I think, Reed, you're absolutely right. And Carol, quite honestly, I look at, and you say you're not a big firm, but you are. You're a fairly large firm, and through these talks and talks that are coming up this year, because a lot of it centers around global warming, it centers around sustainability, net zero, and all of those issues that I think all of the architects and engineers that are on the line should be concerned about. And they should have been concerned about it for the last 50 years and have not been. But a lot of firms talk about it, but they don't live by it. They go to courses and they take the courses, but they don't live it day by day. And they don't live it because they have clients, as you've mentioned, that are government clients. And when it gets tough, they back off and they don't do what you've done all your life and really struggle and consistently go back after the client says no, and you go back a second time and a third time. The interesting thing in your presentation that about the water, which really intrigues me, is that not only what you've done in Chicago, but when you started talking about the inlets and the all of these water inlets that are in every city in the world that have just been left, and nobody even thinks about them, and yet you found a way to actually look at these things that have been just left and nobody even thinks about. And you as an architect say, these could be really beautiful. They could be the next Venice, but you really start thinking about how could they contribute to the community, which is, I'm sure that there's nobody at the municipality thinking about that. But
there's getting to be more and more of them.
Yeah.
The good news is there's getting to be more and more people who are looking at that. I was just last week, I was in Australia, and I was lecturing about rivers and cities. And most great cities are on rivers because they were first transportation and water. It's like you can't live without them. And I think that the realization that they can have a bigger role is a recent one, but I see so many cities doing it. I was in Brisbane, and one of the reasons is they're talking about their AIA. It is AIA. It's Australian Institute of Architects. I found out that they call themselves the Institute to distinguish themselves from AIA. But in any case, they're talking about resiliency. They want it to be the legacy component of the 32 games, which will be Olympic Games, which will be in Brisbane. And they're facing exactly the same problems they wanted to learn from Chicago. And I think it's that interest that you realize that this is so important. Paris has the games this year, and they're actually having the opening ceremonies on the Seine. I think that's crazy, but it's wonderful to just see things in a new way and understand the importance that they have to the future. It's amazing. So I hear what you're saying, but I do think people are seeing that.
Yeah.
I think that one of the media has helped us to do it. Like when you see, oh wow, look at that city, they did this. It's inspirational. I think together, it's going to be together that we solve the issues that we're faced with about saving the planet, about cities.
Yeah, I think what's incredible about what you brought up is to have architects start to have that conversation, as opposed to architects leaving it to perhaps landscape architects and to other people that are urbanists, but our architects, looking at it and saying, we could be part of this, and
I think again,
more.
Our talent is that we are generalists.
Yeah.
Even to a bigger extent than planners or landscape architects, who I would not work without. Our studio does landscape architecture, but I learn from our landscape architects every day. It's stuff I don't know, but as a generalist, I can help put in place.
I'm going to bring on Peter Dubin. Peter, if you want to turn on your camera. Peter is the chair of NORR, and he's vice president of our Chicago office. And Peter has been collecting questions from the audience. So Peter, if you have a few questions from the audience.
I've got one two-part question. Thanks, Silvio. But before I jump into that question, I want to say thank you to Carol. As Silvio mentioned, I'm in the Chicago office of NORR. It's located on the north side of the Chicago River, facing the Riverwalk. I was fascinated to hear you talk about it and the issues of resiliency, and amazed to hear that you've worked on it for 16 years. It's totally a labor of love. We have groups that go there from our office and eat lunch, individuals that go there to read at lunch. We watch the runners, dog walkers, boats on the river. We frequent the restaurants and the wine bars. It's a park. It's a refuge, a hangout, a means of transportation, and it's sculpture. and it's really the new heart of the city. Like all of the Ross Barney projects, it's incredibly multi-layered with so much going on at so many different levels, and it's undeniably one of the great urban design experiences in the world. So on behalf of the NORR Chicago office, Carol, I cannot thank you enough for your contribution to the city. I have a two-part question, so I'm going to read. Your work, and it has to do with your discussion and with Reed about being a generalist versus being a specialist. Your work is incredibly varied. Your projects include federal buildings, transportation projects, religious buildings, industrial buildings, massive urban design projects, restaurants, and each project addresses sustainability, resiliency, and equity. And each project is incredibly innovative and incredibly imaginative. So the question is, how do you do this? How do you do this in an age when so many design firms are trying to become specialized by concentrating expertise within groups or sectors within their companies? How does the design work at Ross Barney? What partners do you have? What's the process? And especially at a company of 50 people, Silvio says that's large. It's not large given the breadth of work that you do. And part two is a question from the chat, is do you think that a couple sectors not represented, i.e. residential and commercial, capture the same spirit as your public work? Or is that development just different?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think I do have huge respect, and I have reliance on firms that are able to have resources to do a lot of research. I have to give credit to, for example, on the Riverwalk, the prime consultant was Sasaki and Collins Engineers. And one of the reasons that happened, by the way, is because the city prefers infrastructure. It's their policy to commission engineers as the prime contractor. It's rare that they'll commission an architect as a prime contractor, but that doesn't change the role. But what I wanted to say is Sasaki could do research that I couldn't even start to do. And so I'm very, very respectful and appreciative of that research being done. The advantage that we have, though, is because our projects are so different that I think we can, the same things aren't expected of us. In fact, the unusual answer is expected. And we've built that into our culture right now. For us, it's really important that people come up with, I tell everybody in the studio from the very youngest architect, is that if they don't bring ideas to the table, they're not doing what I'm paying them for. The other thing I tell them is that they can think about it a different way, but the ideas that they bring to the table aren't theirs. They're the team property, and they'll be used, and they will not be used. Then they shouldn't get really attached to it. So our culture is really freewheeling. When we were smaller, we didn't worry about the culture too much. We didn't curate it. But right now we do. And we try to cultivate, first of all, we try to cultivate the idea that we're a studio, but that you're expected to produce ideas, and that the authorship is the studio's authorship. My job is I'm the editor. That means I get to make decisions, but I am the editor. If in fact, I don't give you ideas, like I said, you're not pulling your weight. So I don't know. It's nice because we can do it at our size, but I don't disappreciate the capabilities of big firms. In fact, I rely on them.
How about part two of this question, having to do with commercial development and residential development?
I don't know. Maybe we'll do some of that someday. We've done two houses. I probably I did a house for the chancellor of the University of Minnesota. We were working for them. We were doing buildings, UMB, the Duluth campus. And we became very good friends, the chancellor and I. It was painful to do her house. I guess it was a good experience for me, but I don't know. I see when I'm working on someone's house, I think they should get what they want. And so I'm not very good at that. I'm still looking for the perfect, great solution. I think when you say find your fun, I think that maybe that's one thing that's not much fun to be. I do think though that my studio, if there is, other people who want to develop that capability, I welcome them to do it. It's just, it hasn't really been something that I've done. We do, by the way, we do multifamily. Again, it's the special pieces. We are about, Peter, you'll know this because it's been really sort of controversial in Chicago. We're about to complete at the end of the year the first project in Invest Southwest. It'll be completed construction. And so that's mixed use. And it's been a real challenge for us to build this stuff. And I think it was helpful that we weren't expert, if you want to know the truth. We asked questions different ways. A hard project, a really necessary project. But I think for me, that would be one area after doing this multifamily project. We've done some more since then. It's one area where you really could use a lot of innovative thought on top of expertise. I think that the housing we're building is wasteful in terms of resources and not very useful as living space. I think it's too prescriptive, for example, and too regulated, especially affordable housing, where you get into all the requirements from the Department of Housing, and it's crazy. I mean, instead of worrying about the livability of space, we worry if they have a linen closet.
Yes, so we're back to the specialist generalist issue again.
Yeah, I think you need a couple disruptors to make you think, do you really need a linen closet? Well, maybe not. But changing that's really hard. So I'd like someone to help me.
Peter, do you have any others? No.
We're at the top of the hour.
Carol, I'll have one last question. I'm not going to ask Reed this question. You've been teaching for 30 years. Sustainability, obviously, it's probably one of the most important things in architecture today, has been for the last 50 years. How are students reacting to that? Has it changed over the last 30 years?
Oh, yeah.
Of it?
Yeah, it absolutely has. And it has to. There's just no way that you can't make it a prime requirement right now. And they are very cognizant of it. And like I said, I think sustainability, building sustainably, is the challenge. This is the purpose of their practices. And most of them know it. They may not be really good at it yet, but most of them know it. And it's good because it's the challenge of that generation, the one that they're going to have to solve.
And
if they do one, that's the one they should do.
And the second loaded questions I have for you, how do you think that we're doing as a profession?
I'm real optimistic in general. I think that can we change stuff? Oh, absolutely. But I think architects are some of the most creative and passionate people that I know. I've always felt that way about my colleagues. Like I said, we're often the design architect to, and we have associates that know the local scene. Universally, I've not found many cynical architects. If you do this, it's a vocation. It's not something that you just do as a job, which is one of the huge benefits of being an architect. I mean, if you can go to work every day and love what you do and really believe in it, you're way ahead of a lot of people. And I have great expectations for architects. I'm also super critical because I think that we can do better. But in general, I'm very high on the profession. I like everything, but we probably go too far one way and then too far the other way. But I think in general, architects are great people.
Thank you. With that, I am going to thank you for this. I think you've done an incredible practice. I want to thank you for this presentation. And it was said before, but you certainly live and breathe what you do. And I wish every architect, followed your lead on this, and especially with respect to sustainability. And I hope every architect actually watches this NORR, including the students that were not able to make it to this. Carol, thank you very much for this presentation.
Well, thank you. I'd like to echo Reed. Thank you for doing this. I think that this is really a great service
You're very welcome.
to our profession. So thank you.
Thank you. Reed, once again, thank you for doing this. Very much
Absolutely.
appreciate. And your question period was stellar. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My pleasure. It's easy when it's Carol on the other end. That's sort of like I didn't have to do any work. So,
Thank you. And Peter, thank you for the questions. And for everyone that's on the line, we'll see you next time. All the best to everyone. Thank you.
thank you, Sylvia. Thank you, everybody at NORR.
Thank you.